So this is the Building Community to End Poverty webinar for community partners. And we've been looking forward to sharing about this new initiative for Fayetteville and the Northwest Arkansas community. And so we're so thankful to have representatives from so many different nonprofits here, Seven Hills, Canopy, IS Foundation. I think we may have someone from Camp Wiggle coming later, Genesis, Arkansas Immigration Defense, Hub of Hope, Jenny, we're so happy you're here. New Beginnings, and sorry if I missed anyone, but that was my list of the registries. Okay, so welcome, thank you so much for being here. Presenters for today, I'm Christina Williams, and this is TJ Williams, and we're leading the launch of Circles in this community. So we both grew up here in this community, and for the past 10 years have been working among vulnerable and marginalized groups in various settings. I currently work at Potter's House as the Director of Research and Strategy, and TJ is the Assistant Campus Director at Genesis Church here in South Fayetteville. So we have an hour together today, so we'll take the main part of our time to talk about the Circles initiative. We'll start by giving some background of how we got to this point of launching Circles, then give you guys a good introduction to what Circles is, and then finally discuss our next steps for how to get this up and launched in Fayetteville. We are going to reserve some time at the end for questions and comments. So if you have questions or thoughts along the way, just save them for the end. But we do want to hear your kind of initial thoughts and feedback once we finish the presentation. Okay, so how did we get here? For TJ and I, we have been learning and trying things in this community for quite a while now. So my background is in sociology, and because of that, we are very familiar with this concept of social capital and how big of a deal it is a person's social network to build that up and to strengthen it in order to be able to advance and maintain a positive trajectory in life. And so I want to take a brief minute before we go into more of the Circles material to talk about why social capital is so critical in the effort to reduce poverty. So the basic premise of social capital is that the social relationships, connections we have, and really the social networks we develop have value. And value because we get access to resources and access to other people through our networks, usually at no monetary cost. So when it comes to social capital, we see vast differences between those in poverty and those from a middle or upper class background. So there are two different types of social capital. And I think it is important to know the difference here. But the first one is called bonding social capital. So you can think of the people close to you, those you can lean on for care and for emotional support. Some people in our community may not even have this in their life, but in many of the poor or low income communities, they actually do have strong bonding capital. You see people taking care of one another. They watch each other's kids, they pay each other's bills, and that's a really valuable social capital for people in those communities. But what we often don't see is bridging capital. And so these are the relationships that can connect us beyond our immediate circle. They're often called the weaker ties that we have. But research has shown that when we're, for example, looking for a job, that we really start relying on those weaker ties, that we start working our networks. And the reality is these are networks that for people in the middle and the upper class that were inherited a lot of times, that we just step into what our parents built for us. So we can see that there is value in having a stronger, wider, and more robust social network. That it's really critical to have this in order to be able to participate, to advance oneself in the world, a world that was developed by and for the middle and upper class. But if you've ever heard of the phrase, birds of a feather flock together, it's a tendency that plays out in our social networks too, that people tend to be drawn to those who are similar to ourselves. It's actually a concept called homophily. But when it comes to social capital, it means that without an intentional effort, our social circles tend to be made up of those who are similar to ourselves. So when it comes to poverty, This means that we're very unlikely to form those connections across class lines, just naturally. If you take it one step further, it means that it's actually extremely difficult for a person living in poverty or someone from a marginalized minority community to build strong, socially and economically valuable social networks. So at this point, I'd like TJ to share a little bit of how we designed a pilot program around the goal of building social networks across class lines.
Yeah, thanks. So at Genesis, we wanted to create a mentorship program for our individuals that were receiving some housing assistance. And I know we typically think about mentorship as a one-to-one relationship. Often the middle income, upper income volunteer, and then the lower income participant. But what we kind of saw through experience is those relationships often became unbalanced, paternalistic. And so as we thought about social capital, we really started thinking about mentorship as more of a community-based approach. And our hypothesis was that if we did that, we could maybe take the load off of the one person by distributing across groups of 4 to 6, and also help the participant expand their own social capital. So thinking about that led us to start a 1-year pilot program that we called Life Teams. And we placed the participant at the center. We called them the leader of the team. And they really owned their goal setting process, their own plan for that year-long program. And the volunteers played the team member role. And they were more of a support and mutuality role in that life team leader's life. And we had a strong desire for reciprocity in that as well. So after a year of doing this, we hit a few bumps in the road, as you can imagine. And our key learnings really were, although we had some intake processes and some training that we did, we needed a lot more of it. The assumptions that people bring into those relationships about poverty and about what it's like to grow up in poverty were definitely a challenge. And also just for both the participant and the volunteer, the level of preparedness for entering into a pretty deep and intensive relationship for a long period of time like this, it just, both of those things really pointed to the need for training. And then also another big thing was a need for program infrastructure. Every team that we had cycled in and out of crisis mode, and so they didn't really have the support structure to manage that when it would happen. Let's go. Oops, I lost my spot. Help me out. So that lack of program infrastructure and that kind of constant process of cycling in and out of crisis mode really compromised those relationships, and especially just the ability for them to remain mutual, for there to be much reciprocity. And just, paternalism became a common pull, especially for the team members. So, and Christina actually sat on one of these teams, and so we got to experience this firsthand, and it was hard. And for me, also being the program director for multiple teams at once, as we started more teams, it wasn't sustainable. And so even just managing one, toward the end, I think we had one still going. The amount of time and energy mediating relationships, advocating and connecting the team leader to resources in the community, and particularly responding to a lot of these crisis situations, all that just made it clear that we really needed a more sophisticated and robust structure for this to really be successful. And so we started looking around for best practices, and we found Circles, and that really rose to the top for us. So let's move on. Yeah. So for Circles, the key to reducing poverty is building intentional relationships across income lines, and increasing social capital obviously is key to the success of that. So why Circles? For one, Circles is, we were drawn to the fact that Circles is a result of 20 plus years of research. They've been doing this and testing and experimenting with it for a long time. It's a long-term solution, and we'll get into more of that in a little bit. It's data-driven. It has a robust program structure. And then a couple of things that were really key for us was there's a strong emphasis on diversity within the program, and there's a strong emphasis on producing leaders. And so I got to particularly emphasize on, empowering participants into leadership. And so I actually got to experience this at one of the recent trainings. A lot of our sessions were actually led by former participants, and they had gone through the program with Circles, and on the other side, we're both volunteering within the program now as volunteers in various ways, which we'll get into more in a minute. But they're participating in training future Circles chapters happening around the country, and it was really impactful for me to learn about pretty complex aspects of poverty from someone who had really lived it and experienced it. So all that to say, we felt really good about this particular initiative, and we felt good about it being our next step after this Life Team pilot. So yeah, I know of several organizations that have wanted to or have tried to start mentorship programs before, and we've really learned that this has to be a community-wide effort. So Genesis, which is where I work, has made the initial investment in Circles and is going to be the host of the first cohorts. But for Circles, it needs to be a community-wide approach, and it really is going to take the community to really make it happen.
Okay, so next we're going to go into more of the specifics about what this initiative is and how it works. So what is Circles? Circles is a lot of things, and it can be difficult to explain in just one sentence because we're talking about circles overlapping with other circles, and so there's just a lot going on here. But at its core, Circles is an initiative that creates the framework for people to build intentional relationships across income lines. And it's a high impact strategy that moves us away from just poverty management to poverty reduction. Okay, so let's talk about this idea of poverty reduction. So yes, poverty reduction means people getting out of poverty, raising themselves up out of poverty. But if we think about it a little deeper, to actually reduce poverty in a community, it has to be bigger than just that. So one of the key pieces to reducing poverty is changing the mindset of the community so that it wants to end poverty, that it moves from being something that could never happen to something that's actually possible. And so this means the community has to think differently about poverty, learn differently about poverty. In essence, we're trying to shift the narrative about what poverty is and what causes it. We also have to think about things at the structural and systemic levels. So talking about changing goals and policies and the approaches to ending poverty. And we have to empower people in poverty to help solve community problems while transitioning out of poverty themselves. So I know we like to talk about empowering people, but it can be really, really hard to do. It's hard to think about putting someone who is living in survival mode in a leadership position, right? Or serving on your board, or even just getting up and representing themselves or others in front of city or community leaders. But I think, and what we've seen with Circles is when you have these other two objectives in place, that and the structure of this Circles program, that there really is a structured path to making this empowerment goal more of a reality. And so, like TJ said, we do see Circles, the broader Circles USA chapter, empowering and producing leaders from among its participants. Okay, so I want to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts of what this program is and how it works. But like in our pilot program, in Circles, the participants are the circle leaders. The volunteers are known as allies, and there are 2 to 3 matched with each circle leader. Allies typically come from middle and upper class backgrounds. The circle leaders and allies, they grow and they learn together through this process. They work together for at least 18 months, and both attend initial training classes prior to being matched. And this training was a big piece for us, that they go through training prior to being matched and prior to this circle forming. It was speaking to that core need that we felt with our Life Team pilot. So looking at a little bit of what the training is, circle leaders go through a 12-week training process. Some of the training topics include just poverty and understanding the trauma that poverty causes, understanding differences in socioeconomic classes, there's courses on personal finance and beginning to think about budgeting and how to manage your own finances. And then setting SMART goals, getting you prepared to enter into the Circles process. So Circles provides the training curriculum, but it's also structured in a way that we can tailor this to our specific community. So if we have experts in various areas, they can come in and enhance the training. So by the end of this 12-week training process, Circle leaders have gone through the process, they've set their SMART goals, so now they enter into these weekly Circle meetings with their allies that they've been matched with, and they're ready to go. They're ready to begin their process. It's also a very good vetting process to see who's ready and committed to this journey, to see them go through the first 12 weeks of this initial training. And then the ally training, this is a key piece as well. At Circles, they like to talk about poverty IQ. So meaning increasing people's awareness of their assumptions about poverty and increasing their knowledge of the complexity of poverty. Ultimately, the trainings are in place to help volunteers become successful allies. But this starts with allies being able to see Circle leaders as being the experts on poverty. And that's one of the things that we saw was really hard for people. They wanted to jump in and always offer examples and problem solving, but to be able to see the Circle leader as the expert on their situation that they've experienced and lived and gone through. Also understanding differences between generational, situational poverty, how poverty correlates with race and gender and trauma, and being able to see the systemic nature of poverty. So those coming from a middle and upper class background have to do the work to uncover their own stereotypes and biases, to deconstruct those narratives that we're all told about poverty and the American dream, to better understand the decisions and the struggles that Circle leaders are faced with, and to understand that poverty isn't just an individual problem, but that our institutions and our policies and structures have evolved or even have been designed to produce these biased outcomes. Okay, so back to the nuts and bolts. Think of Circles as multiple layers of circles. I think the complexity here really shows that this program has come about through practitioner research, that it's not just theory. So in other words, you can tell that this has been designed and grown and refined over time through experience. So you have multiple circles coming together for weekly meetings, and this forms the cohort. And this allows Circle leaders to not just interact with their allies, but with other Circle leaders and their allies. And so an initial cohort would have 10 to 15 Circle leaders, with after that initial one, we're being able to expand to 20 to 25 by the next round. And then from there, we can begin to launch additional chapters in the Northwest Arkansas area and expand the number of cohorts and participants through that. Okay, so then resource teams. And this is the key piece that we feel like we didn't have with life teams that we get very excited about. And I think when we say infrastructure, this is what we're referring to. That there are these structured support teams that surround Circle leaders and their allies. These teams are made up of volunteers, key community leaders, and members. I think even participants people in our community that maybe are not ready to be a Circle leader can still participate in this process through being part of resource teams. And these resource teams are what really brings this initiative into the purview of the broader community. So I want to go through these 5 different resource teams quickly. I think we could do a whole webinar on each team because there's so much to them and they've really built them out well. But I'll just touch on some of the key pieces of what each team is. So first, there's the community team. And these are people who make sure that the operational and facility aspects of weekly Circle meetings are in place. So they secure the meeting space, they secure the meals, they plan the meeting agendas. And if there's a speaker that needs to come to one of the meetings, they secure that speaker. And then they provide meeting facilitators to facilitate these weekly meetings. They also plan childcare and children's programming. Circles has programming for kids follows a similar kind of community building training thread. And then on all of these teams have a chair and sometimes a co-chair, and then various coordinators like a meal coordinator, children's programming coordinator. And these are all volunteers in the community. Different organizations and volunteers may be better fit for different kinds of teams. I think the community team, churches, college groups, sororities are a great fit. Other types of, dedicated volunteers would be a great fit on the community team. Okay, the second one is the recruitment team. And this team goes out and recruits potential circle leaders and allies and other resource team members. So they network in the community, they do community presentations, they talk to frontline service workers to see who would be a good fit for this. They screen the people, they train them, and then they get them enrolled, the ones that complete the training. The jobs and education team, that's fairly self-explanatory on what they're set out to do. But these are people, you want this team to be made up of those who have strong business contacts or who can go out and build key relationships with business leaders, get them to see a vision for carving out space in their companies to employ people that maybe they wouldn't normally employ, people that are also connected at the university and with different academic institutions. I love that this is its own team because one of the things we experienced with life teams is we had, the different volunteers, the team members on the team, a lot of them worked really hard to help secure jobs for the team leaders. But as exciting as that was in the beginning, that like, oh man, we helped you get a job, it very quickly had started causing conflict in the relationships. If the person didn't show up at the job or they quit or it just wasn't going well. And that we saw with the volunteers that then they got put in a place where, my relational equity with this business person or this employer is now on the line because I put my neck out there. I got you this job. And that in turn created a little bit of discord within the team. And so I think putting jobs and education inside a resource team really helps protect those leader-ally relationships. And we do have a strong desire to bring the business community into this process. It really is going to take the full community to make this a strong and effective program. Okay, services team. This team takes an active role in knowing what resources and services are available in the community. They help circle leaders and allies get connected to the right resources and become educated on how to navigate to and through different services. And then finally, there's Big View. And I think this is the team that is maybe the most crucial for circle leader empowerment. So I want to talk more specifically about what Big View is, because I think it's very unique to this program. A key component of Circles is intervening at both the individual and the community level to end poverty. So this means not just helping families get out of poverty, but also working to remove the barriers that keep people in poverty. Okay, so Big View. Once a month, Circles holds a Big View event open to the public in which progress results are shared and community-wide barriers to stability are identified and solved. The primary goal of the volunteers on the Big View team is trying to get the right people in the room for these monthly meetings. So this could be local representatives, this could be business leaders, leaders of other nonprofits, and just people from the broader community. But they bring them there to hear circle leaders share about specific barriers they're facing in the community. And so this gives circle leaders a real voice of influence in our community. And this helps to make the community more aware of, for example, how a specific policy decision actually plays out in someone's real life. So to me, this is advocacy and community education coming together to work to change the mindset of the community so that it wants to end poverty and it knows how to end poverty. One of the key things Big View often addresses is the cliff effect. So the cliff effect occurs when a family begins to earn above the limit set by the state and becomes ineligible for subsidies on things like food, housing, childcare, and other benefits. And I think probably a lot of us have experienced this with people, but it is one of the primary barriers to that economic self-sufficiency, that you make progress, but then you can kind of fall off the cliff because now you've lost benefits that you now have to pay potentially full price for. So for 6 years, Circle USA, the broader national program, has been conducting research and developing tools to better inform individuals in poverty and policymakers on how to navigate and try to mitigate the cliff effect. So they've created the cliff effect planning tools for families, which estimates losses in state and federal assistance programs in relation to their income increases. So they can kind of plan ahead and see how things are going to affect them as they begin to increase their income. And the cliff effect mitigation cost effectiveness calculator is a tool that was created to help policymakers predict how a program or a policy change will affect the target population. It's often policymakers can't see the broader effect that one policy may have on the people they may be trying to help. Okay, one example of a Big View success story that we heard at a recent Circles training was around evictions. And I just want to share this because I think it's really encouraging to see how the Circles program and Big View can really have tangible effect on a community. So in a Big View meeting, a Circle leader shared about her experience with receiving a 2-day eviction notice on a Friday. Because it was on a Friday, it didn't give her any opportunity to respond, and she couldn't access the services in the community that could potentially help her since it was over the weekend. She shared this in a Big View meeting where a state representative was present, and he was actually deeply impacted by her story. And this ultimately led to new state legislation being passed to change the 2-day eviction policy to 2 business days so that they couldn't have this weekend issue. And so that was a huge win for the community and for people that have faced this kind of situation. Okay. I want to touch briefly on the impacts of Circles USA and kind of the outcomes that we would be working towards with this initial Fayetteville chapter. So the primary indicator of progress in Circles is around earned income. Circle leaders see their income increase an average of 30% after participating for 6 months, 43% after a year, and 72% after 18 months. The goal is really for people to earn at least 200% of the federal poverty guidelines. I think we have an opportunity here in Arkansas because we have the ALICE data to even get more specific than that, to know kind of what the actual amount is that people need to kind of move beyond that just survival budget mentality and life. So I think that's a really exciting thing for us to know, that we have the data and the context needed to be able to see what success actually looks like in a program like this. And Circles does track and measure other indicators that they see growth and kind of that positive trajectory on. So transportation, housing, education, just growth in social support, kind of your social relational safety net. They track those things. And so this is definitely something that when we say that they're data driven, that will be a part of this chapter and is a part of all Circles chapters, so that we will be able to tell that kind of broader community story of where we're headed in the effort to reduce poverty in Northwest Arkansas. Okay, so TJ is going to talk a little bit about next steps and where we're headed from here.
Yeah, so that's a lot to process. We're trying to fit a lot into a fairly short amount of time. And as Christina said, Circles is something that's developed over a long period of time. And so it's one of those things that it can be a lot to try to articulate what exactly it is. And so but just to kind of talk to this, so right now we're in the planning stages with Circles National. And that's a highly, as you can imagine, highly involved process. And given the pandemic situation, we're not really at the point right now of launching cohorts or gathering together, but we do want to start building momentum now. There's a lot of work to do. And like we've already said, this is a community wide effort. And so we really have a couple of questions for you to think about today. One, who else needs to learn about circles? We know that you're connected. We know that that there are more people in this community that need to be a part of this conversation and that need to be a part of this effort. And so we want you to walk away from this thinking, okay, who else needs to know? And then we're going to continue to do webinars in the future. And so we'd love for those people to participate in that. And then second, what is your role in Circles? Maybe it's to be a resource team chair. Maybe it's to sit on one of these resource teams that we've talked about as a team, as a resource team member, or just to be a representative of a key partner organization. We have a lot of great organizations represented here today. And that's because it's such a community-wide and collaborative effort. Circles isn't trying to lead the way in a lot of crisis management, a lot of other types of efforts, and the resources that already exist in our community need to be utilized. And that's really what Circles is designed to do, rather than to try to get in there and do that work for you. And so even if that's even just being a representative of a key partner organization, if that's the role that you can take, that's incredibly valuable to this process. And so from here, we'll reach out to each of you to follow up and to talk about some of these things. But from here, we wanted to open it up and have a little bit of time for questions, comments. And so would love to just know what your initial thoughts or any questions that you have about Circles.